And I know that in the Judaic community, based on a conversation I had with a local Hasidic rabbi, they believe that prophecy continues to happen. Like, this is an ongoing aspect of the human experience. Do you think someone like a Bob Dylan, like someone that kind of changed the way people viewed the world, and he did have a moral message in his early music, do you think that that's a similar social impact that a prophet could have had or would have had?
Maybe we could first address the idea that prophecy still exists.
Yeah.
As opposed, to the notion which was promulgated by the early rabbis, that prophecy ended at a certain point during the early years of the Second Temple. Maybe 100 years, BCE, something like that. But I think there were some political reasons for that. In other words, the Romans weren't keen on people speaking from what they claimed was a divine source, and encouraging resistance and changing the system and those kinds of things. So the rabbis wanted to protect their people from undue persecution by the Romans. In other words, these are just crazy people. These aren't divinely inspired by our God. And I think also when early Christianity started off, the early Christians wanted to expand the Hebrew Bible to enlarge the canon, to take into account the new movement. But the rabbis weren't especially keen on that idea, and in order to proclaim the canon closed, they had to declare the end of prophecy, because the Bible is a prophetic book.
Right.
So if prophecy ended, then there's no more canon. There's no more official scripture. So that was intended, at least in part, to exclude Christian influences. But if you look at the Talmud, which was written after the closing of the canon, if you look at Hasidism, like your friend is an acolyte of the Besh, the founder of Hasidism, and the characters in the Zohar, the mystical text which occurred after the closing of the text. Yeah, there's a lot of prophecy that is still being reported. It isn't like in the official communique, but it extends close enough from the periphery that it still can be considered a part of the Jewish stream. Oh, okay. And your question about Bob Dylan. Well, the rabbis exerted themselves mightily in the distinction between false prophecy and true prophecy.
Okay.
Who's the true prophet and who's the false prophet? It's a moving target. It just depends. But there are some basic guidelines, which would be, is the message of the prophet consistent with that of the Bible? Ethical monotheism. The golden rule and one God. Ethical monotheism. So is what the person is preaching or teaching, is it ethical monotheism? And if not, then you shouldn't pay attention to them. Number two is, what is the character of the prophet? Is he or she a good person or a bad person? So that's another criterion for determining if someone is a false versus true prophet.
So it's largely up to the individual to assess the character of any sort of spiritual teacher in general, but specifically someone endowed with that.
Yeah, you want to discriminate. Yeah, you want to investigate the nature of the teacher or the person or whatever, and the nature of their teaching. Especially with respect to the nature of the teaching, there are some benchmarks, which are contained in the Hebrew Bible. In terms of the person's character, there are plenty of examples. There are plenty of figures in the Hebrew Bible that were virtuous. They were still human. They still made mistakes, but they strove to be virtuous, and they had virtuous goals in mind.